Hello and welcome to the final forecast of this challenge, starting off with the Soco Le Mans, I think is how you pronounce that, from Kamikaze Fox. I feel like I could sum up this entire challenge with, is that how you pronounce it? I don't know, I'm terrible with these, so sorry. Anyway, yeah, French brand I'm assuming, with a interesting looking car. I do like the use of sunroofs for the like pop-up headlights. I think that's a cool idea. I wonder actually if you could. I mean, not expecting that. Maybe I shouldn't click anything now because I'd mess it up. But some of these sunroofs are up. I wonder if you can do some interesting things with like layering headlights inside. Maybe things with like the modular headlights to sort of give it a pop-up sort of effect where it's like the lights are slightly up. I wonder if you could do like a sort of sleepy eyes look, I guess. I don't know, that's the thing, I'll have to experiment with that. Anyway, random tangents aside, yeah, this is a, I don't know, it's certainly interesting looking. There's some nice level of detail here. I think I do like these vents across it. I think using, these are like the, if they load, there's like some indent fixtures and like shaping and things, which this car uses quite a lot of actually, around by here. So there is a nice level of care put into it. Yeah, these stuff here. I didn't actually realise I had vents. So that's an interesting thing to note. I'll have to try and use some of that then. Yeah, and I do like things like using this lip to sort of shape the front bumper a bit and things like that. I wouldn't exactly call it pretty, but again, it's that sort of crazy 80s supercar thing, and I kind of like it for that. So 7 out of 10 for the styling. I think it does do a good job of looking 80s, and slightly offensive with the bright colours and stuff like that. Not sure if offensive is really the right word. Well, it's sort of bright and loud and stuff like that. So yeah, sure, I'll go with it. But yeah, it's just got that sort of cool 80s aesthetic. I just don't think it's particularly good looking, if that makes sense, but I still think it's good for the sort of car it's supposed to be. Anyway, going on to the chassis, fiberglass panels and carbon fiber chassis. Interestingly, some negative quality on the chassis. Really anything of note there, but yeah, I suppose just trying to get it within the engineering time. Actually, if we take a look, yeah, right on the edge, so probably just trying to drop down that engineering time. Interestingly then, overhead cam free valve setup, still a V8, but not dual overhead cam full valve like a lot of other cars. The bottom end, especially the crank, I've been seeing this quite a lot now, billet steel, when quite a lot of these cars can take forged. There we go. That took surprisingly long, but yeah, there we go. Yeah, I've seen this quite a lot where lots of cars have billet steel there. I know it's only like 0.9 engineering time, but that's still a decent amount, especially since it's got +2 on the bottom end. Although, to be honest, I'm not quite sure why it's being revved this high anyway. And I think it's, well, it's sort of close to being limited by torque. But I suppose you could just go heavy duty there and it doesn't need to rev that high, really. I mean, like, it's revving to, yeah, 7.3 at the moment. Probably doesn't really need to rev beyond 6,800, to be honest, because there's so much power drop off there. There's a bit of leftover octane. It does have quite low compression. Not too aggressive cam profile, but it does give it a decently drivable power curve. Like, the turbos don't spool up too late at all, considering it's going to be driven at sort of high speeds. You really don't need to worry about anything too low. I mean, it looks good to have a quick spooling turbo, but I suppose in this challenge it isn't really too necessary. Also a bit of positive quality there. I suppose that's why they had to cheap out on the top end stuff, because there was just quite a lot of quality. Turbo setup though, I mean, it's sort of trying to balance AR and turbine size when really that isn't the way to go in automation. So you can probably make it spool up a bit quicker there. Don't think there's any point like showing that now with the amount of cars in this challenge that I've gone and adjusted the turbo setup for. Surprisingly, no low ignition timing, actually. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a bit more to get out of there. Oh, it actually gained octane quite quickly there. Yeah, just a little bit more, really. So yeah, that's just part of optimizing the octane used. But yeah, I'm not sure why it's revving so high, because you'd think like anything beyond there, there'd just be no point. Once you start getting some power drop off, you might as well just cut it off, because there's no point revving all the way down here. You're just losing power then. So there we go. No first muffler, so it's just got a single straight through, which is fine. It's supposed to be loud since it's a supercar, and well, it's turbo anyway, so that helps dampen the sound a bit. Makes it a little quieter, which is always useful. No body quality or anything. Actually slightly undergeared. If it was geared a bit higher, I don't think it'd quite hit 200. But we can see there is like a bit more top speed to get out of it. 195, I think. Maybe they were trying to optimize for more acceleration than outright top speed. Make it a bit more useful in BeamNG, I suppose, with the turbo lag. Although turbo lag isn't too bad. Anyway, quite a rear-biased all-wheel drive system. 74% of the power going to the rear, and a viscous diff. Also quite high spacing, actually. I don't know. I suppose it looks alright here because it's got quite a long, quite high RPM limit. But to be honest, I don't know. Maybe this is actually a better choice than just cutting it off early. I don't know. I would have thought that, you know, there'd be no point really shifting too much further down, but actually, so the gearing is still quite long, so you still end up making more power if you really rev it. Well, there's still like 100 horsepower. I think it's geared too long, personally. But there we go. 310 wide rear tyres on semi-slicks. Yeah, those are quite wide. 18-inch wheels, all pretty standard stuff. Alloy wheels, fair enough. I've just noticed the production units here. That's kind of impressive. I'm guessing it's all in aerodynamics. I've forgotten to check. But yeah, brake setup, pretty standard stuff. I mean, just making big vented discs, decent brake fade, to be honest. Interestingly, a 50-50 brake bias, with basically the only difference being the rear discs having one piston. Interesting choice. I mean, I suppose it does make sense. Like, if you can get away with something like this, it works. So it's just something interesting, I suppose. And I don't know, no aerodynamic quality. I wonder if it's something like interior or something, because that production unit's slightly crazy. I don't think we've seen much like that without quality spam. Unless that is just fiberglass panels and carbon fiber chassis, but I wouldn't think so. Anyway, yeah, loads of front wing angle, but there's only a lip at the front here. I believe that's a lip, at least. I haven't checked. Yeah, front lip there. You can tell I'm very prepared here. And then most of the downforce though coming from that rear wing, which, given the size of it and the fact there's some decent wing angles, should give plenty of downforce. It's just, will it be able to get turned in? Will there be too much understeer from that amount of downforce? We'll have to see. I think it is sort of narrow enough. Well, definitely look how much curl there is out here, so it won't get knocked off or anything. It does also have an under tray. That only really helps in automation. There we go. Also lots of brake airflow, so in theory, won't be any sort of brake fade issues. Handmade interior, luxury cassette, and sort of McLaren F1 style 3-seat layout. I quite like that. I know sort of technically the McLaren F1 sort of had 3 seats in a line, but the back seat, or the 2 outside seats, were slightly further back. I'd call this a better way of representing that than, say, using just a free bench or a 3-seat bench at the front. So yeah, I think that's quite cool, and a bit of quality there. ABS as well, which should be good, and it's pushing the limits of safety there. trying to reduce some weight, which makes sense. I do wonder if, because I think I have sort of experimented a bit with this, and it is actually a bit lighter to run like standard 80s. I think once you get into advanced, I don't think you can actually make up the same sort of weight. I'm not sure. 38 there. And no, it is lighter to go to advanced. I think, well, if you can get away with it, it's worth it. But I think that depends on era, because I think I've seen a couple times that running advanced and then negative quality is heavier. Maybe it depends on other things like the chassis. We'll have to see. And then going into suspension, air suspension, and all the fancy stuff. On suspension, definitely a French kill then. 1.2 G scoring. I've just noticed that's quite impressive, and it's not too far over the oversteer line or anything, so it's nice and stable. There's not too much camber on it either, so it is all just that semi-slick tyres. And I think maybe having a good power distribution helps. I'm not sure if that's massively influential on... it doesn't change the handling graph and cornering force that much. Having a wheel drive would say rear biased or anything like that. So that's still quite impressive setup. And again, a bit more quality. This, there's some interesting things going on with the engine, but overall it does look like a very good setup. So going into BeamNG, I think the test driver is going to find this easy to drive. But I do wonder if maybe it isn't quite going to be to his liking with the all-wheel drive and things. I don't know, he does like a very oversteery car, which this seems almost a bit too safe, but we have seen some surprises already, so maybe not. We'll have to see. Next up from NiuYorqCiti, I think I'm pronouncing that right. Yeah, I told you that's the tagline for this series. Yeah, we have the Koji X12S, which, yeah, look at it, it's fantastic, isn't it? This car got 9 out of 10. I think, again, it's very good in the way that it looks. It's very 80s. I think this leans more to the concept side of things, which, I mean, is partly this body, but you've got things like this big glass roof here, and also glass mirrors, which I mean would technically work. I don't know how great they'd be for looking at, but there we go. And let's not question how you get inside without like anything like that. Maybe like this door just like opens in and you have to crawl under the glass. I'm not sure. No, but like that's just nitpicking there, isn't it, really? I think it's a really cool looking design, as like a sort of 80s concept car looking thing. I'm less of a fan of the rear. I don't know if this design is quite as sleek and cool looking as the front. I do love the way that it's all flush with the body, makes it look super aerodynamic and just cool. But yeah, the back of it I think is almost a bit with like the way the lights are sticking out and things, although maybe having it flush would look really odd as well. But yeah, I think it does just do a cool job of looking like a 80s supercar thing. I like the two-tone sort of thing along the bottom here. I love the effort put into it, using like sort of these individual trim fixtures, especially when combined with like these vents here. It makes a really cool effect, I think, and the way that it's like carried around the car with some nice effort being put into sort of continuing it. Yeah, I just think it's really cool. I don't really know what else to say. There's some just cool details about it. It does fit the theme very well. And it's like the stickers along the side here, the like clear vents here. It's a really cool thing. I could totally see this being like unveiled in like 1988 as a sort of futuristic, here's a thing we're going to unveil in the 90s, or maybe it's like the sort of some concept car they put in a TV show. something like that. I don't know. I don't know. It's cool. I like it a lot. Let's go on to the chassis then, because this car is very well optimized for this challenge. Should we just start with the stats? Because 68 sportiness and 85 prestige. I can't remember if that's the highest sportiness. I think it is. That's definitely the highest prestige. So yeah, already this car is starting off very strongly stats-wise. It's all pretty standard stuff. Nothing too weird or anything. It's got a V12, slightly undersquare actually. I suppose to reduce some weight. Overhead cam full valve, which is an interesting choice, but well, unique. It makes a lot of sense to go with it. But yeah, again, billet steel when it doesn't need it. Not sure quite why, but yeah, it's just like a weird theme of this challenge, I guess. To have that. I suppose the last one was galvanized steel. That's the thing for this competition. And then like a sort of surprisingly tame cam profile considering the power. Like it is over 100 horsepower per litre. And yeah, under 60 cam profile. Bit leftover octane, but to be honest, at that point it's probably decently optimised. Maybe you could run a bit more boost. I'm not sure. And well, it is a turbo engine, so you would expect lower compression, but yeah, sort of on the lower side. Pretty decent sort of turbo setup, about what I'd expect. And since it is sort of high power, you would expect a bit of lag here. But again, as I said before, it's as long as you're sort of making decent power and the turbos are all spooled up before, say, 4,000 RPM, it's not going to be an issue, really, with the way these cars are being driven in BeamNG. Fuel mixture sort of on the leaner side, ignition timing sort of neutral, might be a bit more power. Part of me wonders if they did restrict the power slightly so they get a nice 650 horsepower figure. I'm not too sure there, but there we go. And yeah, the only complaint I really have about this engine is the mufflers being backwards. Just as an example here, if you run them backwards, there's a bit more power to be gained there. I suppose you lose slightly more torque. So maybe you lose a bit more power down here, but like there's a bit more peak, but more importantly makes it a bit quieter, and a bit more fuel efficient. Also increase the required cooling, but yeah, I don't know. I'd take those sort of benefits over it, over you know the over this, or over the cooling thing. I don't know why that took me so long to say. I'm having brain fade, I guess. +5 quality on the body, all-wheel drive, and again a very rear-biased power distribution. Under 3 seconds 0 to 60. So yeah, this is... I can't actually think, is this the fastest accelerating car? I can't remember if we had one car that was faster accelerating. I should have really written that down in the notes, but I forgot to check that. Give me a second. Okay, game crash and all that. Yes, this is the fastest accelerating car. So yeah, and under 3 seconds, especially in the 80s, that's very impressive. So yeah, I mean, it is on semi-slick tyres, but 265s, I mean, they're decent sizes, but they're nothing like crazy. So it is, yeah, rather impressive that it's getting that sort of 0 to 60 time with tyres like that. Or maybe semi-slicks are way more powerful than I thought they were. Yeah, some good cornering forces, and it is right on the sportiness line. I think it is slightly under oversteer, not or it's slightly understeery instead of slightly oversteery, at least at the sportiness dot, although it is mostly oversteery, as like a general handling thing. The brake setup here is a little weird. Neither the brakes lock up under heavy braking, although maybe in BeamNG the road surface isn't quite as grippy. I don't think it is though. I think actually the highway track that we're using has quite good grip even. So really that's just lost braking performance. I mean, you can see there 32.9 braking distance. I mean, if we give it some slightly better brakes, okay, sure, it's only minor, but it is still a performance benefit. And in fact, you get a bit better sportiness. In fact, there we go, it's well within the rules. And that's a decent sportiness gain right there. So, yeah, a bit of lost potential there, and I'm sure you could optimise that braking setup even more. But yeah, that's a bit weird about it. Quite low rear wing angle, probably not going to supply that much downforce in BeamNG, especially since it's quite small. And does have an under tray, that makes no difference. Pretty normalish interior, quite high quality though. Or I say normalish, normal for this challenge. Sports, and then premium cassette, and yeah, lots of quality. Probably partly explains the production units there. No safety at all, and some negative quality. I'm amazed you can't go lower there. Nah, not quite. Would save some weight though. But yeah, no ABS at all, which should be fine with this braking setup. Oh, I wonder if that's it. They didn't want to spend engineering time on ABS because that is a big sink. It's like, yeah, there's like 5 engineering time for something that doesn't really have any obvious gains. But I don't know, maybe they were aware of test driver, or like having brakes that don't lock up in BeamNG is going to be an advantage, or at least easier to drive. And maybe that was their tactic, underbuild the brakes, make the brakes not powerful enough, and yeah, I don't know, it's an idea. And suspension setup, pretty standard stuff, built to be comfortable from the looks of it. And yeah, it's sort of on the drivability, comfort side, doesn't really make a difference. And yeah, not really too much to talk about here. This car, I have a feeling, is going to be up there with one of the best ones. I think we're going to have to see how it does in BeamNG, although I don't think that's really going to sway the scores too much. Yeah, I think I messed up a bit with the way that I scored that. I might have to adjust the scoring a bit for the next challenge, but yeah, this, I don't know, it's a good car, pretty well set up. Only real issue I have is with the brakes, but yeah, there's lots of good stuff about it. So there we go. Next from Der Bayer with the BAM Turbo 6. I'm assuming it's BAM, not BAM. Maybe it is BAM, I don't know. Yeah, a sort of more low-end looking sort of supercar in my opinion. I think this looks more like a sports car. Something that would slot in probably like above the MR2, but like sort of below the Corvette, which actually is still quite a wide range of things. Maybe, yeah, I don't know quite where I'd put this in some. Trying to think of low-end 80s sports cars now, and yeah, nothing really coming up. But yeah, this yeah, sort of that price range in my mind. It doesn't look as expensive or as fancy as some of the other things we've got here. I think it's quite subtle and quite simple in its styling. I think it's decent looking, but I do think things like, I don't know, the centered exhaust pipe here, which is huge by the way, probably accurate though, seeing as it's a inline 6. But yeah, it's got a few weird styling quirks, things like these taillights I'm not too sure about, but it's quite distinctive in the same way. I do like that it's got a distinct style about it, so I can't really criticise it for that, especially since it's not particularly ugly. I just don't think it's anything outstanding, so 5 out of 10 for the styling. I will say I approve of white wheels. I always will. I love white wheels, so yeah, that's a cool thing. Is it playing up now? There we go. Yeah, aluminium panels and space frame chassis. So it does sort of continue that theme of this being maybe a lower end, sort of less expensive or less, I don't know, developed sports car, if that makes sense, or supercar. Which, to be honest, I know this is the more realistic option, but you've got to sort of compare it to everything else here. And there, but it still has double wishbone suspension, aluminium panels, and all that good stuff. The engine, as I've said, inline six, a 3.2 litre. So, yeah, it's a interesting choice. Also reflecting the sort of BMW inspired names there. Makes 400 horsepower, so it's good power, and of course, being an inline six, it spools up nicely. 3,000 RPM, even though it's well over 100 horsepower per litre. Bottom end stuff, all pretty normal. Is revving right to the limit of the pistons, but doesn't really need to go much further. I don't think there'd be much benefit in doing that. And yeah, everything compression maybe a bit low, but it's a turbo engine running decent amount of boost, and it's actually running quite a big compressor. Interestingly, the intercooler is slightly restricting power. Now I'm not sure if that's to get a perfect 400 horsepower. I've seen a couple people do things like that, where they sort of limit the engine to get nicer power figures or whatever. I don't mind too much, it makes it easier for me to remember things, but it is sort of wasted potential, I guess. Yeah, and sort of just in general, the setup's pretty normal. The thing I find weird though, it's got a race intake, when sort of nothing else about this car really says anything too aggressive. Like, you look at the cam profile and like even the boost level, I mean, it's sort of aggressive, but I don't think it's like race intake aggressive. Also, the exhaust system, no catalytic converter, which is fine. It's within the rules, and it's only got a straight through. Still quite quiet though, thanks to that turbo. But yeah, the race intake, especially without having like Super 98 RON fuel or anything like that, just seems like a bit of a sort of bizarre outlier in terms of setup. Gearing wise, it is slightly undergeared. Could maybe get a bit more top speed. I know it's only a mile an hour or two, but every little point helps, I suppose. Although, to be fair, like 1 or 2 miles an hour may not even change your score with the way that I've sort of configured the points and everything. Maybe I need to go back and look at how I do the scoring, but I don't know, the system's working for now. A geared differential, which will make the test driver really happy, and 4 seconds 0 to 60. Considering everything, it being 2-wheel drive, having, I don't know, lower end of the power, and not being anything outstanding weight wise, yeah, that's quite impressive. 4 seconds. 295 tyres on the rear with semi slicks. Quite a big difference in tyre sizes, and it is right on the sportiness line. Mostly oversteer, so the test driver is probably going to improve with it, and quite a lot of quality on the tyres there, so should be good. These brakes though are very powerful, probably a bit too powerful. In fact, if I remember correctly, this car doesn't have ABS. No, so we might have some issues with locking up and maybe not being able to brake effectively, but it does at least look like it's fairly well balanced. So if the test driver gets used to braking with this sort of extra force, it shouldn't be too much of a hindrance, in theory at least. And it's got sort of sporty pads as well. Yeah, all pretty standard, I suppose. Lots of wing angle and a fully clad under tray, which is understandable. But no wings as far as I can tell. I did have a look around. I didn't see any wings hidden about inside, so that means that the aerodynamics only take place in automation and not in BeamNG, which, I don't know, might actually be an advantage since you can get some sportiness bonus in automation, but no extra drag in BeamNG if you don't think downforce is worth it. Sport interior, premium cassette with a bit of extra quality, and then, as I've said, no ABS and no power steering, interestingly. One of the few cars that have opted to run without it, and I think by far the most civilised car to not bother. standard 80s safety, and yeah, plenty of room on the to like add negative quality or whatever, but I sort of get why you don't. Quite a lot of camber, which yeah, explains that handling or cornering force of 1.25 G. It's quite impressive. And then sort of looking at the setup, doesn't seem particularly optimized for everything. Maybe drivability. So yeah, overall this car does seem somewhat well optimized for challenge. I mean, it's pushing limits on things like comfort and reliability there. I suppose things like the race intake do make sense looking at this challenge. So yeah, I don't know. This car's interesting. I do like that it's got a unique engine. I don't think any other car in this competition has an inline six, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this car performs. I think the test drivers may be going to like it. I think it all depends on the brake setup. And finally, from Camel Factor, we have the Iron Tiger. This is a bizarre car to finish on, a sort of eco hypermiler thing. Yeah, this visually, I don't know. The front bumper reminds me of, if you ever played Need for Speed Underground 2, the Verabrace, I think it's pronounced, front bumper. Yeah, it's an interesting design. There are some alright ideas, things like the side here. It's interesting, at least. And the back isn't too bad, if just a bit generic. So I ended up giving it a 1.5 basically. Just it wasn't as bad as the cars that I gave a 1, but I don't think it was anything outstanding enough to give a full 2. Didn't think I'd actually need to resort to decimals, but I had to on a couple of cars here, so there we go. Yeah, 2-spoke wheels as well, which an interesting choice. Suppose they fit the era though. And the colour scheme is interesting. Does at least have most of the details there, wipers and window washers and aerial, and yeah, it's got everything there. I just don't think it's executed in a particularly pretty way or anything. So there we go. Let's take a look at it though, because it is quite interesting mechanically. The entire car is built to be as lightweight as possible. As you can see, McPherson struts front and rear, fiberglass and carbon fiber chassis. And the game's lagging like crazy because it can't deal with me changing menus. Amazing. Right, the engine is a 2.8 litre dual head cam inline 4. Interestingly, this engine seems to be built for maximum efficiency, but not necessarily for fuel economy, if that makes sense, because it is quite a big engine still. At the end of the day, smaller displacement engines will use less fuel, unless like you really mess up the setup on it. So, I mean, I get that you need to like bounce power, and that's where a high efficiency engine comes in, is that they make lots of power, but don't use much fuel. But yeah, that's the case here. All the bottom end is crying out for help, and yeah, just because it's a really high stroke engine, trying to save weight, but also get that efficiency up. Quite a low cam profile. There is like various points where lower cam profile doesn't improve efficiency, and I'm gonna guess that 33 is the point on this engine. Yeah, it does depend on things like head type and things, but yeah, dual overhead cam, and I think it also depends on things like where your turbo spools up and things like that. But this is usually the sweet spot on a dual overhead cam 4 valve, which this is. Quite a low compression ratio, but it's a turbo, surprisingly high boost actually. Like for an eco engine, like I know it's still a sort of powerful one, although it is still a fuel economy over performance engine. Yeah, it's quite a lot of boost, in my opinion at least. Expect sort of something a lot less. Of course, the entire turbo setup is really restricting power, as you can see. spools up at 1,800 RPM, which, while being easy to drive, I suppose, yeah, you can see that there's a lot to gain in terms of increasing intercooler size and adjusting things like AR compression or the compressor, whatever. Entire setup here, lots of quality, race intake, and it is running on Super 98 with very lean fuel mixture, very high ignition timing. I'm actually curious if that is good, especially because it is quite low revving. I might have to give it a quick experiment into that. Yeah, as I suspected, bit of a efficiency loss there, just because it had such high ignition timing. Usually balancing ignition timing with compression does lead to better performance, especially on turbo engines where you really need to use every bit of octane you've got effectively. Let's set it back now. Obviously, the fact that it's making a bit more low-end torque, as you saw there, didn't mean the bottom end was getting a bit more stressed, which would maybe, actually, yeah, with the amount that the con rods are being stressed by, changing to heavy duty wouldn't really work, which is a bit of a problem. So yeah, this entire engine may be a bit problematic in its setup, but I don't know, it's still, well, it's right on the limit of reliability there. Nothing in the exhaust except for a straight through. Quite a lot of quality on the exhaust there. I'm kind of surprised at that, considering how free-flowing it is anyway. Sort of, why even bother with one muffler? Just make it go straight through, I guess, if you really want to eke out fuel economy. You can easily adjust the suspension to improve comfort, and if fuel economy is your primary concern, then, well, suspension's an easy way of improving it. Anyway, lots of body quality, a bit into the transmission, and you can see that very high RPM with the very flat torque curve. It does manage to do 155 miles an hour, which means that it's not actually the slowest car here by a fair amount, despite having the least amount of power. So yeah, just very flat torque curve. Should at least feel decent to drive, even if it isn't particularly powerful. There is still a decent amount of wheel spin thanks to high spacing, and also thanks to hard long life tyres. They're 295s, but with quite a bit of quality as well, but that won't stop them from spinning up. There is also a geared diff here, which will be helpful, I'm sure. I do wonder how those tyres are going to perform in BeamNG, since I do know that basically anything other than sports compound tyres do feel like they have a lot less grip. It's amazing the difference between them if you actually feel it. Like, I'm not a good driver by any stretch of the imagination, but I can tell the difference between the tyres. So yeah, I think this car might be at a significant disadvantage by having hard long life tyres. Anyway, yeah, brakes, drum setups at the front, and then a vented disc at the back. I have a feeling this is actually a heavy setup, but I wonder if it was just limited by engineering time. Wouldn't surprise me at all if you can save a bit of weight by going vented. Oh, in fact, vented discs are lighter anyway, and you can go a lot smaller then. Which does improve fuel economy a bit, so that's good. Also, don't mind this, it's just a bit glitched at the moment for some reason. The reducing fuel economy shows green when it should show red, which, yeah, a bit odd, but yeah, I'm not quite sure what this brake setup is. Maybe they changed something afterwards which lowered engineering time and it was actually originally a lot closer, so they couldn't run vent discs. I'm not sure. Fully clad under tray, no surprise there, and not much you can do with cooling airflow really. It's right on the limit of reliability. Interior is surprisingly fancy. There's still a bit of comfort left over to play with actually, but yeah, they haven't pushed it to the very limit there, which is interesting. No safety at all. Surprisingly too, they've got regular hydraulic power steering. Yeah, I'm actually a bit shocked by that, considering this car's light enough to get away without it, really. I think you could make up that bit of comfort fairly easily. And look at the fuel economy gains. Bit of weight save, bit of reliability improvement as well. I think if you've got a car this light, especially in a sports challenge, I think you should really try and push for having no power steering. I think quite a lot of people were a bit too quick to jump onto having any power steering at all, which ended up being hydraulic in a lot of cases, since not many people wanted to put the engineering time in for variable. At least that's what I assume, since there was a surprising amount of regular hydraulic. Anyway, progressive, adaptive dampers and sway bars, passive sway bars. Pretty standard suspension setup there, quite fancy. No sway bars, guessing to save weight and therefore fuel economy, improve fuel economy even. And then suspension doesn't really seem optimized for anything specific. But there we go, and it is right on the sportiness line, without really any adjustments to camber or anything from normal. So there we have it, an interesting car to end the final part on. The BeamNG videos are a bit delayed, I know that, and I apologise for it, but they should be coming out, and then the next challenge should hopefully be announced soon after that. I have something a bit weird in mind. I know this was weird, just wait for that next one. But yeah, and until then, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Boost and Ethanol for more, and goodbye.